In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear friends, welcome back to our weekly readings of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Let us sing the Troparion of the Feast of the Ascension, and we will resume. The Redeemer of the world. I do apologize for having to sing sort of with my eyes somewhat diverted, and that's why the camera is a bit unstable. My apologies. Let me set everything up real quick and we will proceed with our reading as usual. We are continuing to read the sayings of Abba Sisoes the Great, or those which were, if not his, then about him. And of course, Saint Sisoes is truly a great saint and a source of great consolation for us. Chapter 21. When Abba Sisoes went to Klizma one day, some lay people came to see him. Though they talked a great deal, he did not answer them by so much as a word. Later, one of them said, "Why do you bother the elder? He does not eat. That is why he cannot speak." The elder replied, "For my part, I eat when the need arises." Now, that's quite interesting. So he's basically saying, I only eat when the need arises. And the reason why he was not talking most likely had nothing to do with the fact that he did not eat at the time. Chapter 22. Abba Joseph asked Abba Sisoes, "For how long must a man cut away the passions?" The elder said to him, "Do you want to know how long?" Abba Joseph answered, "Yes." The elder then said to him, "So long as a passion attacks you, cut it away at once." So, well, that's pretty clear and sort of not really in need of commentary. You should always resist a passion and you should cut away at once whenever it approaches you. This is the only way for you to find peace and to make progress in your Christian life. Chapter 23. A brother asked Abba Sisoes of Petra how to live, and the elder said to him, "Daniel said, 'Do not eat the bread of desires.'" Now this is very interesting. So he's talking about the holy prophet Daniel, and he said, "Do not eat the bread of desires." What does it mean not to eat the bread of desires? In other words, he's saying, do not feed your desires. If certain desires come to you, though they may be natural, but not expedient or not necessary, then do not feed them, do not indulge them, do not engage into conversation with such thoughts. And in that way, you would not be eating the bread of desires. The reason for this, perhaps, is the fact that if you are, in fact, in quotes, sort of eating the bread of desires, if you are entertaining various desires that enter your heart, you could be providing the ground for the passions to take root inside you, inside your heart, inside your mind. And we all know that if we have been thinking about something long enough, we will end up doing or acting upon the thought which we have dwelt on for quite some time. It is only when we cut off the thought instantly, if we do not sort of take this bread of the desires, if we do not taste it, then we're able to resist the sin, resist the actual, not only the thought, but the deed as well. But if we engage the desire in thought, the likelihood of us committing to that desire indeed grows exponentially the longer we accept the thought. Chapter 24. It was said of Abba Sisoas that when he was sitting in the cell, he would always close the door. Well, I imagine he did that to avoid distraction, because if the door is open, that means anyone could come in, passing by. But if the door is closed, well, at least the person would have to knock, and that way he would not also be tempted to look out through the open door. The door is closed, and then he's focused on his inner life. And you might say that it could also be used as an example. The actual door to his house, to his cell, was closed, but that also means that he kept his heart closed also to the various passions and to the various thoughts. And of course, that is something that all of us must do, to be diligent to please the Lord by keeping our hearts pure, just as we close the doors in our homes so that various animals and insects don't enter our houses. In the same way, the door of our heart must also be always closed to the passions and sinful thoughts. Chapter 25. One day some Arians came to see Abba Sisoas on Abba Anthony's mountain, and they began to speak against the Orthodox faith. The elder gave him no answer, but he called his disciple and said to him, Abraham, bring me the book of St. Athanasius and read it. Then they were silent, as their heresy was unmasked, and he sent them away in peace. Now, this is quite beautiful. So it basically says that rather than arguing himself, he had his disciple, Abraham, read the book of St. Athanasius the Great. And as this book was read, and of course St. Athanasius the Great taught the true Orthodox faith, or you might say the Orthodox faith, because true Orthodox faith is almost like what is it? It's too much. It's like saying the true truth. Yeah. So at any rate, as the book was read, they were corrected. And interestingly enough, he read them the book. He had the book read in their presence rather than argue with them. And that is also a great manifestation of love. So he appealed to the authority of someone who wrote the book, to St. Athanasius. And of course, as they heard it, they were corrected. But that way, he did not sort of presume to lecture them. He simply shared with them what he believed based on what is written in the book, and they were edified. That is both great love and humility on his part. Chapter 26. Abba Amun of Reithu came to Klizma one day to meet Abba Sisoas. Seeing that Abba Sisoas was grieved because he had left the desert, Abba Amun said to him, Abba, why grieve about it? What would you do in the desert, now you are so old? The elder pondered this sorrowfully and said to him, What are you saying to me, Amun? Was not the mere liberty of my soul enough for me in the desert? Now, in Russian translation, it's slightly different. He says, what are you saying to me, Amun? Was it not enough for me in the desert to have the freedom of my mind? Now, my soul, yeah, I think that's, probably quite close, because the mind and the soul here are quite synonymous. And why does he say it like that? Why does he say that he had the liberty of his mind or his soul in the desert? Liberty from distraction. The desert is quite barren. There's only so much you could see in the desert when you're dwelling there. As you look around, you see rocks and sand. That's all you see. Very, very, very scarce vegetation, very few animals. And so in that sense, yes, when he lived in the desert, he sorrowed about departing from the desert because of his old age. The fact that he came to live in Klizma, whichever that was, would it have been maybe a small settlement, or at least some place where other monks could look after him. But in the desert, he missed the freedom from distraction. And Of course, that's also very edifying for us, because oftentimes we wonder, why is it that we do not progress in prayer? Why is it that we are not doing well in our spiritual struggle? And we do not pay attention to the fact that we are surrounded by so many distractions, starting with our phones and probably ending with our phones, because nowadays it's no longer books, newspapers, or magazines. It's not even the TV. It is the internet, but the internet is now not just in the computer, it's on our phone, and our phone is in the pocket, and then the pocket vibrates, or it actually rings, and we're so distracted, and we think, why is it that we cannot pray freely when it's time to pray? But if you think about it, we pray a small part of the day. You know, our morning prayers, our evening prayers are just a small portion of the day. And if the rest of the day we spent constantly being triggered by the slightest notification or something, it's very, very, very hard then to focus and to free our minds during the time of prayer. And that is why it might actually be a good thing from time to time for us to go into, sort of our man-made desert. Turn off the gadgets, maybe set the do not disturb so that they don't ring and don't annoy us. Set them aside, put them maybe in another room. Some people experience tremendous anxiety when you just simply take their phone away from them. But if we perhaps maybe take some time and read some of the Holy Fathers, read the scriptures or the Psalter, or read some prayers, aside from all the gadgets, it could be a tremendous help. And of course, someone would say, well, Father, but nowadays we even read our prayers on our phone and we read the scriptures on the phone. Well, if you do that, if you use a gadget to read, turn on Do Not Disturb, sort of, make sure that you are not accessible to any distraction, and it will help a lot. Chapter 27. Abba Sisoas was sitting in his cell one day. His disciple knocked on the door, and the elder shouted out to him, saying, "Go away, Abraham, do not come in. From now on, I have no time for the things of this world." That's rather odd. However, in some cases, what we have to read is not what is written. And we have to be extremely careful when we read between the lines and we read sort of between words. But if you think about it, all that is given to us is that his disciple's knocking on the door, and he just basically shouts and says, "Go away, Abraham, do not come in from now on. I have no time for the things of this world." Well, that obviously has to relate to the fact that somehow, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, Saint Sisoas perceived that Abraham was going to talk to him about something pertaining to the things of this world. Having foreseen that in the Spirit, he told him to go away. The disciple by himself coming in would not have been a thing of this world. Obviously, Saint Sisoas was not abusive or mean to Abraham, his disciple. But most likely, Abraham had the intent of discussing something that pertained to the things of this world. And St. Sisoas beat him to it. He didn't even let him actually say it. He just simply said, "Go away. I don't have time for the things of this world." Chapter 28. A brother asked Abba Sisoas, "Why did you leave Setis, where you lived with Abba Or, and come to live here?" The elder said, "At the time when Setis became crowded, I heard that Anthony was dead, and I got up and came here to the mountain. Finding the place peaceful, I have settled here for a little while." The brother said to him, "How long have you been here?" The elder said to him, 72 years. Oh, well, that is quite beautiful and very touching. And in some way, this particular saying is quite sort of illustrative of the humility of the Desert Fathers, of their lack of pretense, of their utter and pure simplicity. So he explains to the brother who asked him that Setis got too crowded for him. So he knew that Father Saint Anthony passed away. So he came to the mountain. He saw that it was secluded. He liked it, and he stayed here for a little while. And when the brother says, "Well, how long is the little while?" 72 years. And if you think about that, so he lived in Cetis for some time as well. So he's probably well in his late 80s or 90s at this time, because he probably spent some time in Cetis being a disciple of another elder first before he ventured out on his own. And so that's really quite beautiful. For a little while, 72 years. That reminds me of the story of Abba Lot and Abba Joseph, when one was asking the other and saying, I pray a little, I fast a little, I give some alms. What can I do? And most likely we know that by praying a little, he prayed a lot. By fasting a little, he fasted a lot. And then alms, I'm sure he gave more or less everything that he didn't need for his own sustenance. We know that one of the fathers once asked sort of about his budget, basically said that whenever he sold his handiwork, he got 3 golden coins. With 1 golden coin, he bought the materials necessary for the next batch of the handiwork, whether it be baskets or ropes. Then, with another gold coin, he bought himself the necessary bread for his food, and the 3rd golden coin he gave away to the poor. So, leaving essentially no savings or no luxury. And when St. Joseph, Abba Joseph, heard all that, he said, if you wish, you can become all fire, lifted up his arms, and the light of Mount Tabor, sort of, lightning-like light came out of his fingers and lit up the sky. So this is how humble they were, and yet they worked such great things. So if he says for a little time in 72 years, imagine if he says, I pray a little, I fast a little, I do a little bit of good works. Well, yes, a little time, 72 years, so a little bit of praying, and you can sort of make out how much praying he actually did. Chapter 29, he also said, when there is someone who takes care of you, you are not to give him orders. When there is someone who takes care of you, you are not to give him orders. So yes, that's quite interesting. In Russian, slightly different meaning. If someone is taking care of you, you should not sort of be the one in charge, of things. Yes, because you are no longer sort of the one providing the care, so you shouldn't be sort of making the decision. The responsibility should be on the one who is providing the care. Because giving of orders is not just authority. Any authority assumes responsibility. And that's why he says that. It actually makes perfect sense. If someone is providing for you, you can't very well tell him what to do and how to provide it and so on and so forth. Very much like children, when they are in the care of their parents, are subject to their parents. And it is only when they leave the parental home and live on their own, provide for themselves, that is when they are no longer expected to be subject to their parents in all things. They're supposed to respect their parents, of course, but then they also would make their own decisions about their lives because they're providing for themselves. So that makes perfect sense. Chapter 30. A brother asked Abba Sisoas, if we're walking along the road and the guide leads us astray, ought we to tell him so? The elder answered, no. Then the brother said, should we let him lead us astray then? The elder said to him, what else? Will you take a stick to beat him? I know some brethren who were walking, and the guide misled them the entire night. There were 12 of them, and they all knew that they were lost, and each one struggled not to say so. When day came and the guide realized that they had lost their way and said to them, forgive me, but I am lost. They all said to him, we knew, but we all kept silence. Hearing this, he was filled with wonder and said, even to the point of death, the brothers controlled themselves so as not to speak, and he gave glory to God. The length of the road on which they had gone astray was 12 miles. Now, what is he talking about here? If people go astray in the desert, it can become extremely dangerous, because imagine you have enough water to get from point A to point B, you lose your way, you run out of water, you die. That's what can happen. However, because the guide is the one that has the responsibility to lead the people, to tell him that he's lost would be to assume his responsibility, to usurp his authority, so to speak. And thus, the brethren, even though all of them knew that the guide was leading them astray, he wasn't doing it on purpose, he himself was lost. They were all silent so as not to offend him, not to confound him, and thus not to tempt him. And when in the morning it came to light that they all knew that they were lost, that is why the guide said that the brothers showed love to the point of death, meaning that they were essentially willing to die in the desert before they would offend their brother, the guide. Now, if you stop and you think about it, it would definitely be very extreme for us today. We would consider this to be utterly unacceptable, and if someone was leading us astray, we would not worry about the person's feelings. We would tell him right away and expect, and demand that he correct, the path. But here we see several monks, all of whom knew that they were being led astray, albeit unwittingly, and they were in grave danger of dying in the desert without water, because if they got lost, think about 12 miles, walking 12 miles at a moderate pace. Well, that's a journey of several hours, because what? People usually walk about maybe 2 miles an hour, 4 kilometers, something like that, 2.5 miles an hour. So 12 miles, what, about 6 hours walk? 6 hours walk through the desert during the heat of the day and the cold of the night could be a very, very, very scary notion, especially if someone were to get sick and to need medical attention and so on. And yet, neither one of those monks spoke up so as not to offend the brother. And that is why the brother was filled with awe and amazement. He was shocked that they were willing to die before they would offend him. And of course, I would dare say we can be expected to do the same sort of in the exact degree, because first of all, well, these brothers were willing to die. They were all monastics, and they were probably ready to die, meaning that they had made their peace with God, and they knew, that the Lord would have mercy on them and forgive them their sins. Those of us who have not yet made such firm peace with God, and who might have concern over the fact whether all of our sins would be forgiven if we were to die right at this moment, yes, we would have to speak up. We wouldn't be ready so willingly to accept death rather than to offend our brother or to confound him. And you might say, well, but what would have been wrong if they told him politely? But however politely they would have corrected him, still he would have been grieved that he misled them, he let them down, and they were willing to die rather than offend him. Okay, maybe we shouldn't go as far as actually being willing to die in our day and age, because especially if we're not monastics, say if we have family who depend on us for income and so on and so forth, but we should at least take heed to the fact that their love was so great they were willing to die. We should love our brothers enough, if not to be willing to die, at least to be willing to be quiet, or if we have to speak up in love, not to offend, not to be offensive. Really, that's all I could think about. That is a great lesson for us, indeed. Chapter 31. One day the Saracens came and robbed the elder and his brother. As he was setting off into the desert to find something to eat, the elder found some camel dung, and having broken it up, he found some grains of barley in it. He ate a grain and put the other into his hand. His brother came and saw him in the act of eating, and said to him, "Is this charity to find food and to eat along without having called me?" Abba Sisera said to him, I have not wronged you, brother. Here is your share, which I have kept in my hand. Well, this is quite interesting in a way, you would say. Saint Sisoes is showing tremendous love and great humility and discernment by doing what he does, since he found the grain in the camel's dung. Well, I imagine if he said to the brother, "Well, here is camel's dung. Let's eat some grain from it," the brother would probably be quite turned off. He found it. He ate it himself because he knew where it was from. The brother didn't know. He came and he was offended, and he said, "Is this love? Is this charity? To find food and to eat it alone without having called me?" But Saint Sisoes gave him his share, I guess maybe without disclosing where it came from, so that he would not be put out and sort of broken by having to eat such humble meal coming from such a humble source, such as camel dung. Um, this indeed is a great example of love and humility both, and also of discernment. If you think of it this way, since they were robbed, all of their food was taken away. They are in the desert. There is nothing to eat in the desert. If he turned his nose and said, "Pa, I'm not going to, poke through camel dung," they might have died of starvation. But he humbled himself in order to survive and to save his disciple, and did something that, of course, neither one of us, I would imagine, would even think of, doing if we were in such dire situation. We would probably be looking for something until we fall down of exhaustion because of lack of food. But he had the discernment actually to pick the thing which we would consider unpickable today. Chapter 32. They said Abba Sisoes the Theban dwelt at Calamon of Arsinoe. Another elder was ill there in the other Lavra, so like a great monastery, and when he heard of it, Abba Sisoes was very sorry. Now Abba Sisoes used to fast for 2 days at a time, so there was one day when he did not eat. When he heard about the elder's illness, he said to himself, "What shall I do? If I go and see him, I am afraid the brethren will compel me to eat. But if I wait until tomorrow, I am afraid he may die. This is what I will do. I will go and I will not eat." So he went fasting, both fulfilling the commandment of God and yet not relaxing his way of life for the sake of God. Now, this again isn't something that any one of us would have to face. Most of us eat several times a day, let alone skip an entire day of eating for the sake of fasting. So he was eating every other day. He fasted for 2 days. And so initially he hesitated because it would have been his custom to acquiesce the brethren, and if they insisted that he eat, if they compelled him to eat, he would eat with them for the sake of humility. But then he said, well, if I, sort of go on the day that I can eat, the brother might die by then, so I will go and I will still keep on fasting. And of course, that was a tremendous feat because he traveled during the day of fast, but he also had to rebut the brethren, and if they compelled him to eat, he would have had to tell them no. So that would have been a bit of turmoil for him as well. Yet he kept his rule and also managed to see the other father before he passed away. Now, if someone would say nowadays, well, why would you do that? Why would you actually sort of risk offending the brothers by not sharing a meal with them, but insisting that you are going to fast, and perhaps even looking a bit of like a Pharisee? I would imagine that the only reason for that is because if he were to eat with the brethren, it might have actually derailed his rhythm of, fasting and eating. And who knows, maybe when you fast sort of in such a way and you eat out of turn, you can really upset your stomach and your system. So maybe there are either more simple reasons for him doing what he did. However, often enough we know that the fathers would sometimes give up their fasting for the sake of love, for the sake of charity, if they met someone or somebody came to visit them and they would eat with them. But in this particular case, since he was the one visiting, there was no reason for him to break his fast. He could continue fasting and still not offend the brothers. Chapter 33. One of the fathers related of Abba Sisoas of Calamon, that wishing to overcome sleep one day, he hung himself over the precipice of Petra. An angel came to take him down and ordered him not to do that again and not to transmit such teaching to others. Now, well, perhaps the reason why the angel came is because the Lord knew that Saint Sisoas did what he did out of great love for God and for the sake of keeping vigil for right reasons. However, he did, in doing that, he did put his life in grave danger. And if he fell asleep, he would have fallen to his death. And so since the Lord says, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God," well, the angel told him not to transmit such teaching to others. So we should never practice virtue at the point of danger to ourselves, because that would not be prudent. That would not be right. We should rather choose the path of humility than such danger and risk. Chapter 34. One of the fathers asked Abba Sisoas, "If I am sitting in the desert and a barbarian comes to kill me, if I am stronger than he, shall I kill him?" The elder said to him, "No, leave him to God. In fact, whatever the trial is which comes to a man, let him say, 'This has happened to me because of my sins.' And if something good comes, say, 'It is through the providence of God.'" Now, once again, this is not an easy matter. Do we kill or do we allow ourselves to be killed? Now, if we can avoid killing, of course we must at all costs. We must de-escalate. We must avoid the spilling of other men's blood. And for a monastic, the situation is quite simple. Receiving monastic tonsure, the person actively dies to the world. And very often the monastics would even say that of themselves. They would say, I have died to the world. I have nothing to do with it. So if you are a true monk and someone comes to kill you, there shouldn't be a reason for you to fight, because you should be willing to meet your God and to live to live the proof of your monastic tonsure and to accept death with humility. However, if you are a layman and you have not made such a vow, you have not renounced the world, if you are the one who are responsible for children or for a wife, should you sit there with your hands down and allow someone to kill you, to do you violence? I dare say not. Of course, I wouldn't say you should kill your assailant, if at all possible. If you can simply stop your assailant and prevent your family from getting hurt, that would be the right thing to do, because you're not a monastic. Elder Sisoas was talking to a monastic. For a monastic, in a similar way as to St. Paul, we remember that St. Paul says, for me to die is to be with Christ. So death is gain for me, but to live is to be with you. However, it is expedient for me to be with you, so then I live, but I would have chosen death. He says, basically, I would have preferred to die and to be with Christ. So for a monastic, yes, it is better to die. And of course, there are other circumstances. Now, the brother was simply asking about a barbarian. So, if a barbarian came to kill me, should I kill him if I can overpower him? And St. Sisoas says, no, don't do that. In some cases, God protected the monastics, and when the barbarians would raise their hands with a sword to kill them, their hands would wither, or they would be paralyzed, they would be stopped, they would otherwise be stopped by God, because it was not the time for the monastics to die. The monastics in those particular cases weren't praying for them to be paralyzed or blinded or in otherwise sort of in any other way to be prevented from doing them their harm. The monastics accepted whatever would come from the hand of God. For lay people, things can be different, can be strikingly different. And in that sense, and in that case, of course, we must always be prudent and we must always be discerning. So, having read this, we shouldn't make a conclusion that we should not resist evil. There is a time, as St. Solomon says, King Solomon says, there's a time to gather rocks and there's a time to throw rocks. And there are great saints who were also warriors and who, in some cases, even leveled God's punishment against sinners and struck them down to protect pious people. So this is a very particular case, a singular case, and we should not take it sort of as a broad statement to govern our entire lives. If we were to become monastics and someone were to come and attempt to kill us, yes, as a monastic, we should not resist. We should embrace our death and be happy to be with the Lord. But if we are lay people, if we are responsible for family, in fact, if this is a situation where our death would then enable the person to continue and do harm to our loved ones, to our family, we should definitely think about stopping this person. If at all cost we could stop him in a peaceful manner, in a way that is non-violent, then so be it. But then again, in some cases, even violence can be necessary, and we must be discerning and understanding. And of course, he also adds and says that if you receive the evils that come to you and you say, this is because of my sins, and you do not resist them, you should also sort of receive all the good things and attribute them to God and say, this is through the providence of God. In an allegorical way, one could say, well, what about suffering other evils, other turmoil? Well, perhaps as lay people, if someone is slandering us, or if someone is stealing from us, in some cases, indeed, we should follow this advice and we should not resist, we should not argue, we should not sort of engage, we should allow the things to take their course. In fact, if you are being robbed and someone's asking for your money or for your car, so long as they're not trying to kidnap you, let them keep it, let them take it. You can always earn more money, you can always get another car, but you can't get your life back. So in that sense, even the police teaches people to be prudent and not to engage sort of in resistance with criminals when they come to do certain things to you. If you are being unjustly persecuted, perhaps maybe you can just accept it and say, this is for my sins, and not try to resist and justify yourself and sort of struggle and turmoil over it. That is probably where we could apply this particular advice. But in the literal sense, of course, this is strictly for monastics, and we should understand that as such. Chapter 35. A brother asked Abba Sisoas the Theban, give me a word. And he said, what shall I say to you? I read the New Testament, and I turn to the Old. Now, I imagine that what he's saying is, I read the New Testament, meaning I intend to live by the laws of the New Testament, but I turn to the Old. Now, what does that mean? It's a bit of a riddle, I guess, the way that he responded to this brother. I read the New Testament, for example. I read the New Testament, go the extra mile. bless your offender. Do not resist if someone takes your cloak, give him your shirt also. That's the New Testament. He goes, but then I turn to the Old. And what's the Old Testament? An eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. So indeed, we read the New Testament, but very often the way that we interact with other people is very much in the spirit of the Old Testament. We want our vengeance, we want our truth, we want our proof. And of course, following on the heels of the previous chapter, that makes perfect sense. Yes, in the New Testament we are taught not to resist evil and not to return evil for evil. But very often we read that and yet we turn to the ways of the Old Testament, which teach us, an eye for an eye, and sort of there's an assumption of certain vengeance and exaction of justice, so to speak. But in reality, we see that very often when various robbers would come and steal from the elders sometimes would even help them load their own animals, their camels or their donkeys. And there's a particular elder who once came and saw that the robbers were leaving his place and they left something behind. They didn't take it. So he picked it up, ran after him and said, children, you forgot this. You should take this also. So that is an example of the New Testament piety. But we unfortunately very often sort of tend to live in an Old Testament way. We have, various alarms, solid locks on our doors. We prevent anyone from harming us. And if someone offends us or does something else to us, we want to make sure that he understands where he is wrong and that he should never do that to us again. So indeed, we read the new but turn to the old. Very much about us as well. Chapter 36. The same brother asked Abba Sissos of Petra about the saying which Abba Sissos the Theban had said to him. And the elder said, I go to sleep in sin, and I awaken in sin. Now, what does this mean? and why would they actually respond in such a way? Imagine a young monastic is coming to an elder who has a tremendous reputation, who is known to be the man of God, perhaps considered a living saint by many monastics in the desert, and he asks him for advice. So the one says, well, I read the New Testament but turn to the Old, meaning, I read how I should live, but I don't live that way. St. Paul says, the things that I want to do, I do not do, and the things I don't want to do, I do. And then the other Saint Sissos says, how does he put it? Let's see. I go to sleep in sin and I awaken in sin. So, meaning, his entire life is full of sin. Most likely in thought and sort of in spiritual battle, there's probably hardly any active sin that they would engage. But why would an elder such as great Sissos the Great, say something like that to a young monastic? It is not to be cynical. There is absolutely no intent of cynicism here. But it is rather to say our entire life is full of sin. With every breath, with every look, with every word, we tend to sin. We fall short of the glory of God. And yet these great saints persevered to such an extent. They fasted, they prayed, they worked great miracles. And having reached such heights, they still considered themselves to be great sinners who go to sleep in sin and who awake in sin. So in that sense, such a statement, which could be easily misconstrued, misunderstood as a cynical statement, actually has nothing to do with cynicism, but it is a message of hope and humility for a young monk. Yes, you will struggle, you will do your best. Perhaps maybe you will even gain certain spiritual gifts. You might get from God some discernment, maybe some prophecy. Maybe you will be able to heal the sick or call down rain for the people when they need it. However, you go to sleep in sin and you rise in sin. And if you think that way, if you have that perception of yourself, you will be unshaken and unmoved. No sorrow will be able to overwhelm you. Because think, brothers and sisters, most often we are upset, disheartened, grieved when we think that we are treated unfairly and unjustly, when our expectations are not met. However, if we consider ourselves to be going to sleep in sin and waking up in sin, our expectations should be, well, if we are sinful people, should we have much of an expectation? Perhaps we should expect something of ourselves. We should expect ourselves to pray, to fast, to do our best to live according to the commandments. But what can we expect from other men? And that's another thing that is also a tremendous lesson. If we are sinful, if we go to sleep in sin, and if we wake in sin, should people be disappointed in us? No, we are sinful. And in like manner, should we be disappointed when other people fail us, when they forget to thank us, when they perhaps forget to pray about us, when they are rude to us because they can't control their temper, when they, in other ways, slight us or offend us? Should we upset? Should we be upset? Should we be angry? No. Our expectation should be, if we are sinful, so are other people, and we should have mercy and understanding. Let us finish there for today. God willing, we will continue sort of on a more normal and regular schedule. Next week, we should be able to have our prayer service and our reading on Wednesday. That would be June the 8th. So God willing, I will post an announcement on my website and also in my Signal groups. Hopefully, if I remember, if you want your names to be commemorated at the Maleben, feel free to send them to me. You know how to get a hold of me. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in commentaries or send them directly. Perhaps at some point in time we could even do some questions and answers. Sometimes during the live broadcast, people have left their questions in the chat. You could do that and I will respond. Usually I respond right away and even pause the reading to respond to you and to answer your questions. Please pray for me, a sinner. I've had a bit of a cold, a couple of negative tests, so I don't think it was COVID, but it's been a bit of a wild ride. That's why I had to cancel last week's reading. Do forgive me. I needed some time for recovery. Pray for me, and God willing, we will continue next week. Let us sing a short prayer, and we'll say farewell. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless and mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. God bless all of you. Please keep me in your prayers, and thank you so much for your kind wishes. All the best.